no collection. Now it is. I know. Hey. Okay. Just want to thank everyone for being here today. Hope everyone had a great Labor Day weekend. And I always begin by thanking our host here today, Tom Kershaw, for being such a great friend to the New England Council. He may hear us. He's in Nantucket, but he may hear us. Appreciate his hospitality, to say the least. There are an awful lot of dignitaries here today. You know who you are. But just in case, John, we have a couple of ambassadors here. Barry White, former ambassador appointed by President Obama to Norway. George Bruno is here. And I believe he was an ambassador to Belize. And who else do we have here? I think that is it on the ambassadors. And I also see my good friend Shannon O'Brien in the back. Nice to have Shannon. It's hard to believe that the summer is just about over, but yet to me, this is the favorite time of the year, September, October. We have a very busy fall, the New England Council. Couple events coming up in the next few weeks. We will have Congressman Stephen Lynch be speaking here. We have Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island speaking in Providence. We have Representative Seth Magaziner speaking to the New England Council. Later this month, we'll have a breakfast with Governor Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire, as well as a sixth centennial toast. As many of you know, each New England state, we did a toast to our members in the individual states, and our next one will be in Newport later this month at Salve Regina, which is a great venue to say the least. Next week we'll be in Washington. Congressman Bill Keating will be speaking to the New England Council. Laurie Trahan will be speaking to the New England Council on October 14th. Early in October we have Governor Lamont, Connecticut, speaking to the New England Council. And, of course, on October 20th, we gather at the Encore at Boston Harbor, marking the 100th year of the New England Council, which makes us the oldest regional business organization in the United States. And days like today, we feel like 100 years old. But we're gonna plug ahead. And Larry Zabar is here, has done a yeoman job on the dinner. Yeoman. We are closing in on 200 tables. But as Larry says, we always have one left, just in case anyone wants to inquire about the additional table. But to all of you who have supported the New England Council throughout the years, I should say, I say thank you. We're only as good as our members, and boy, our members step up to the plate. They say they're very loyal, very supportive of all of our initiatives. So I say thank you. Today we're delighted to bring you a very special program, a little different, needless to say, featuring some extraordinary public servants, former U.S. ambassadors. We're very fortunate that our region is home to many of our nation's top diplomats, and that several of them have taken the time to join us here today to share their insights on the state of the U.S. foreign relations at a, needless to say, a pivotal time in our nation's history. So I was reminded that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was once asked, "What do you need?" And he thought for a minute, and before he gave an answer, they said, "Would you need more military armament?" And he said, "No." "Do you need more military personnel?" And he said, "No." And then he just paused and he said, "We need more diplomats." Because diplomats are peacekeepers. So with that, my job is very simple, is to disappear. And I know Jim Siegel will be very pleased. I'm disappearing. Bob Sherman is here. He serves on our board of directors of the New England Council. He himself is a former ambassador to Portugal and appointed by President Obama. And he is going to manage the conversation with some, questioning, and then hopefully give an opportunity for some of you who have already asked me if we have a chance to ask some questions. So Bob has just been a terrific friend. Many of you know he's the founding member and the former co-managing shareholder of Greenberg Traurig. He has a wide-ranging trial and regulatory experience in the area of government investigations, litigations. Ambassador Sherman has also represented clients in corporate high-profile cases that have generated significant media attention, to say the least. So I can't think of a better person to moderate the discussion here. So I'm just going to introduce quickly the three very special guests that we have here today. Someone that needs no introduction, but will get an introduction, and that's Ambassador Vicki Kennedy, who I've known for half of my life, in the sense that she and her husband were part of my life, and I can't say enough about her. Needless to say, serving as the U.S. Ambassador in Austria from 22 to 25 under President Joe Biden. Prior to that, she also worked at Greenberg as senior counsel. She's also and should be very proud, she's also the co-founder of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, the United States Senate, and served as the president of the Institute Board. And she served there up until her nomination as ambassador. She's also working very, very hard. I'm sure she's saying, if you can sell 200 tables, you will help us. And we have our gala coming up, the 10th anniversary of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute of the United States Senate. It's coming up in October, and they will be honoring two people that we know an awful lot about, and that's former President Joe Biden and also a former mayor of this great city and a great friend to all of us here, Marty Walsh. So anyone that's interested in knowing more about the gala event, talk to Vicki afterwards. But it's going to be a great, and days like this, when we talk about that institute, I think of Jack Connors. Jack Connors is so responsible in raising a significant amount of money and establishing the Edward M. Kennedy Institute, and with Vicki's assistance there. So, second is Ambassador John Sullivan, who served as the United States Ambassador to Russia 2019 to 2022 under President Donald Trump and Joe Biden. He previously served as Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy Secretary of Commerce. He's currently a partner at the law firm Mayer and Brown, a distinguished scholar at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, and a distinguished fellow at Columbia University. Not bad for a guy that grew up on 68 F Street in South Boston. Not bad at all. So, finally, no stranger to anyone here in this room is the former U.S. Ambassador to Ireland, Claire Cronin, from 22 to 25, served under former President Joe Biden. Prior to her nomination, many of you know that she served in the Massachusetts House for 9 years, representing the 11th District of Plymouth, which was Easton and Brockton. Served 9 years, but she was chair of the Judiciary Committee. She was majority leader. So a very, very, very impressive career in the legislature, to say the least. Now that she has returned home from the Emerald Isle, we're thrilled that she has joined the respected public affairs firm, Smith, Crawford, and Costello, and the University of Massachusetts has chosen wisely and asking her to be affiliated with the Mount Ida campus in Newton, where she is now a scholar in residence. It's a very distinguished position to have, but a position that she obviously has earned, and we wish her much success. With that, I'm going to ask our moderator, Bob Sherman, to take it over. See if I can pull this out.
So first of all, I want to thank everybody as well. Let's get right into the program. And I think the place I want to start is the fact that you don't become an ambassador unless you have a commitment to public service. And all three of you have had a deep commitment to public service. starting with you, Vicki, talk a little bit about what that commitment means to you and how was it instilled in you?
Thanks, Bob. Before I do that, and I will, and I'm sorry, and I won't filibuster, but I just have to say thanks to Jim Brett and the New England Council, to Larry Zabar for putting this incredible program together. It's just really an honor to be here. And just to see so many familiar faces in the audience, it really does make me feel wonderful and like I'm back home. So thank you so much. And to be with you, my colleague and friend, as our moderator. Claire, it's wonderful to be with you, my fellow appointee and non-career ambassador, to be there. But I have to say that the honor of being on the same panel as John Sullivan is just extraordinary, who served both in Republican and Democratic administrations. He served at such a pivotal time in the history of the world. And I hope we'll really be talking a lot about what it means in terms of the world order that we're facing right now. So, and with all that, now well go to your answer and say,
yeah, we'll get to that. Believe me, we're not going to ignore John in this.
I had to say that it is. I know that I should say that it was because I married a wonderful person who cared deeply about public service, which is part of it, but actually I feel like I was just born into it. The belief that we have an obligation to give back to our country is something that was instilled in me in birth, and it kind of goes back to maybe the founding of our country when Benjamin Franklin said, the greatest question you can ask in the world is, what good can I do in it? Mm-hmm. You hear echoes of that in Ask Not What Your Country Can Do For You, Ask What You Can Do For Your Country, and President Kennedy. So for me, I think it's the sense of infinite possibility if we all are rowing in the same direction, all fighting for the same love of our country in some way. Even it's not about party, it's about patriotism. And I consider public service to be the highest calling you can have.
Claire, let me skip to you for that same question, then I'll get to John.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a family that really instilled the value of public service. My mother's brother was the mayor of the city I grew up in. I also was the third generation in my family to serve in the Massachusetts House. And not a baton that was passed. My mother's uncle served in 1929. Her brother served in 1948 with Tip O'Neill. And I came along and got elected in 2012. So from the time I was a very young child, my parents both said, my father a Pearl Harbor survivor and was away in World War II, the importance of serving your community, your state, your country. So it was something at a young age that was always instilled in us, that you could really make a difference by doing that. So I found myself, and then when President Biden had asked me to serve as U.S. Ambassador to Ireland, I had never had the opportunity to serve for my country. And as much as I absolutely loved my role in the Massachusetts State House, there is no greater legislature in the world, I am convinced, despite what some of the newspapers will try to tell you. I had to do that and leave, and it was a great honor to serve in Ireland.
So, John, Jim gave a brief introduction of your background. He talked about, the fact that you were at Commerce, you were Deputy Secretary of State. He left out a number of public positions you held. You were a Supreme Court clerk. You worked in the Justice Department as well. How he failed to mention that you are also the author of a great book called Midnight in Moscow. And I will tell you, if you haven't read this book, you should. You should go get it for two reasons. One is you will not be able to put it down. I can attest to that to myself. And secondly, John has promised me 25% of any sales that have come in this room. This is a transactional deal we have right here. So given your involvement, moving back and forth into the public-private sector, talk about that. Talk about that commitment to public service.
Yeah, I think, as with Vicki and Claire, I think it stemmed from my family. My father, my mother, Their brothers had served in the Second World War. My father and his brother were World War II Navy combat vets, and my mother's brother landed at Normandy on D+6 with the U.S. Army. Only one of them went into public service. My father's brother joined the Foreign Service after getting a graduate degree from Fletcher after the Second World War. But I really grew up imbued with American patriotism. And I remember as a kid in the 60s, even in the tumult of the 60s, in the late 60s, thinking to myself how lucky I was to be born in the United States into this great country. And my God, what if I had been born anywhere else? And I've kept that ideal despite all that's happened over the last 60 plus years. And I was motivated for public service, but I was timid. I had an uncle who had served in the Foreign Service, and I was interested in foreign affairs and national security issues coming out of college. But I was afraid to take the Foreign Service exam. I might flunk. I was pretty timid. So instead, I went to law school. Nothing better to do, right?
It's an easier path.
I took the easy way out. I went to law school, and because of that, I progressed through legal jobs, but I progressed through legal jobs that progressively had a foreign affairs and national security component to it. So I went to work in the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department at the start of the Bush 41 administration. And that office, it's relatively small, effectively the general counsel's office of the Department of Justice, but opines on national security issues, and that's what attracted me to the office. And I was hired as a civil service employee. And the thought never occurred, my plan was I was going to make a career at the Justice Department. And I got a promotion, and I didn't think about the professional consequences for me. The leadership of the office, this young Assistant Attorney General, William P. Barr, and his deputy, a guy named Mike Ludig, promoted me, gave me the title of counselor to the Assistant Attorney General, but it converted me from a career GS-15 to a political appointee. And I didn't really focus on that until this guy from Hope, Arkansas, won election in November of 1992, and then I didn't have a job. And my career path was significantly interrupted by that. And I was also, by choice, identified as a Republican, so I would not be serving in the 8 years of the Clinton administration. So I went into private practice. Went back into government, had the opportunity to serve in more senior positions at the Justice Department, but instead, this is post 9/11, went to work at the Department of Defense as the Deputy General Counsel of the Department of Defense, working for Secretary Rumsfeld. And so it was a combination of things. My fear at trying to do something on my own, becoming either a Foreign Service officer or creating my own career and just following the herd to law school. But once I was minted as a lawyer, I made my career choices based on my interests in foreign affairs and national security policy. And that's what ultimately led to my being picked as Deputy Secretary of State. An interesting aspect of that was I hadn't been involved in the 2016 campaign, but I had met, when he was Major General Mattis, Jim Mattis, who had been picked to be, by President Trump, to be Secretary of Defense. Mattis called me to ask me to serve with him at the Defense Department, which I was thrilled at the opportunity. And I won't bore you with the details, but ultimately Mattis and Tillerson made a trade, and Tillerson promoted me to the White House as a candidate to be Deputy Secretary of State, and that's how I wound up at the State Department, and then 3 years later in Moscow.
So if you do buy the book, you don't have to read the first 2 chapters now, because this has been summarized brilliantly. We're going to get to Russia in 1 second, but I want to also talk about non-career, ambassadors going to Western capitals. Vicky, you were in Austria. Claire, you were in Ireland. I was in Portugal. Barry, obviously in Norway and the like. And people tend to think that all you do at that point is host cocktail receptions. Well, Rudy Giuliani once interviewed me and asked me if I spent my day walking around with my pinky out and a glass of sherry in my hand. I explained to him I lived in public housing when I was there, but that's another story. Anyway, talk a little bit about what your priorities, Claire, starting with you. What was your priority coming in, and also can you give an example of the importance of working closely on an important initiative between the United States and your host country in Ireland?
Sure. First and foremost, when you do become an ambassador, you are the personal representative of the president in the country that is hosting you. Your priorities are to promote safety and security of Americans who are in the country, and that includes, of course, our businesses. We look to work on shared challenges. We also look to work together to combat various issues. One example that I can give to you is shortly after I was there was a drug cartel, the Kinahans in Ireland, and with the State Department as a joint venture between the State Department, Customs and Border Protection, and the Irish government, we worked trying to seek the arrest and conviction of the Kinahan family. So early on in April of 2022, we unveiled a great program where the State Department was offering $5 million on each of the Kinahan family members. So that would be Daniel Kinahan, Christopher Kinahan, and his other brother. That was a significant issue for all of the countries involved because the Kinahan cartel was supplying drugs in the United States and throughout the world. We're still looking for them, but the noose is getting tighter, and it's through that shared work together, with the Customs and Border Protection, the Irish government, and of course the State Department. So there have been many arrests since that first announcement in April 2022, and I think you will see that in the near future you may be seeing that they have landed the big guys. So that would be one example, and that was very early on in my tenure.
Vicki, how about you? You got to Austria in January of 2022.
I arrived in Austria in January of 22, and on February 24th, 22, Russia did a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which is closer to Austria than the most western part, closer to Vienna than the most western parts of Austria. So we immediately had those challenges from the second I got there. As Claire said, as ambassadors, our number one priority really is the safety and security of Americans. It's spreading our values and finding areas of common interest where we can continue to work with our counterparts in government. Austria is in a unique position because it is a small country with a very large capital, Vienna. Lots of activity and intrigue goes on, as you may have read about in Vienna, people say. But we're surrounded by NATO countries, and Austria is not a member, not a NATO ally. Because after World War II, part of the condition of Austria not being occupied was that its deal with the then former Soviet Union was that it would be neutral and wouldn't become a member of NATO. At least that's as the story goes. So Austria is a partner for peace in NATO, meaning it's part of peacekeeping forces. It works under UN flagged missions for peacekeeping. And it's a member of the European Union. and it has common defense capabilities. So it's a very conflicted situation. But what happens with this war? Where is Austria? Is Austria going to be looking west in this transatlantic alliance that's really important? Is Austria going to be looking east? So a lot of our work was in continuing to keep the solidarity of Europe, even with an independent, neutral, if you will, country, to make sure sanctions were followed and that we were all speaking from the same hymn book, if you will, and promoting American values in a very, very real and deep way. At the same time, you asked about specific examples, we're doing our other work that's really important. You're promoting trade, you're making sure that we had delegations coming from the United States. We were working on issues of workforce development for companies that were coming to the United States. We're working on apprenticeship programs for high-tech manufacturing jobs. My second year there, we had the numbers from the first year I was there. Austria was the fastest growing, not in dollars, but in terms of rate of growth, foreign direct investor in the United States. They were voting with their feet. We were predictable. We were a good place for businesses to be investing in. But we were also working on humanitarian issues. Vienna had been, prior to 2016, 2017, Vienna had been a hub for religiously persecuted minorities from Iran to come to the United States through Vienna, something called the Lautenberg program, Lautenberg Spectre program, where they would come in. But that had been suspended. It got suspended in 2017, and so we spent a solid year. There had actually been 5 years before that of working to try to get Vienna to restart saving religious minorities from who were being persecuted, wanting them to be reunited with family members in the United States. They had jobs as soon as they got here. They had family members. They had health insurance. There was no financial burden on the United States, but we couldn't get Vienna to agree. But we managed to get that program restarted, which was, I think, one of the proudest moments of achievement. There are not that many things you can do that you say, this team effort actually saved lives of people who were being persecuted. But we were able to get that started. I'm sad to say the program it's in abeyance. Maybe it'll come back again. But we were able to get some people out. So that's one example.
So we're going to drill down on Austria a little bit later in its complex relationship with Russia. But John, I want to also mention a couple of things. One is, first of all, you refer to your uncle, by the way, as the real Ambassador Sullivan in this. But you came to Russia, and for Claire and for Vicky and for some of us, we're welcomed by the countries that we are posted in. That's a different story in Russia. You got there in 2020. There's a pandemic, and I think the important thing I want to raise before I ask you about that is the sacrifice that people make for public service. Certainly, we know about the Kennedy family sacrifice, but you also made a huge personal sacrifice in the fact that you were living separately. I don't mean separated. You were close to your wife, but you were there at the time of the pandemic. So she was back in the United States. She was a lawyer and the like. And then the war broke out, and you were in essentially a lockdown situation there with her. They're expecting that once you left, you would spend many happy years together, and that didn't happen. Unfortunately, your wife passed away on September 5th of 2022. You had to fly back, especially for that, and tomorrow is the 3rd anniversary of your wife's passing, and I think we all want to just acknowledge her passing and the sacrifice that you made for your country that got in the way of your ability to spend the kind of time you wanted to. So, with that, let me ask you, when you got to Russia in 2020, did you have any inkling that there may be a war? How were you thinking about your job, and how were you received by the Russian government?
Ukraine was a festering problem, but it wasn't top of my agenda, either in the Trump administration or even at the start of the Biden administration. We had a lot of other things to focus on: arms control, election interference, cyber attacks, you name it. Ukraine was there as a persistent problem, but it wasn't as though I was getting instructions from Washington every day or every week to try to make progress. My reception by the Russian government, everyone treated me very politely, and it was, but we were smothered. We, the U.S. mission to Russia, the U.S. embassy in Moscow, we were smothered by the FSB, which is the Federal Security Service, the principal successor to the KGB. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the KGB split into the SVR, which is their foreign intelligence service, and the FSB, which in the U.S. system, the closer analog might be the FBI, but it's really a combination of FBI and CIA. To give you when I say smothered, let me give you a sense of proportion. I believe our understanding was there were approximately 7,000 FSB officers in the subsection, the counterintelligence section of the FSB, dedicated to monitoring the U.S. Embassy and its personnel. 7,000 out of an organization that has roughly, the numbers aren't public obviously, but best guess is 350,000 officers in the FSB. To give you a sense of proportion, the FBI, a tenth the size, maybe 35,000. So when I say smothered, I mean smothered. Everybody who left the compound, whether it was a school-aged child or the ambassador, was tailed by at least 2 and often 4 FSB officers. And they didn't do it to me, but to my colleagues. They were walking down the street. Somebody would just jump in front of them, snap a picture, try to hand them an envelope and take a picture of them accepting an envelope, and then they would, accuse the American diplomat of being a spy, poisoning our pets. We had a lot of dogs on the compound, and we had 2 dog parks, a dog run, and one of them was right on the other side of the main wall, and they throw chicken bones and over the wall so that dogs would sniff and choke on a chicken bone. One day they threw an enormous plastic bag of blood over the wall, and these aren't some random protests. Nothing like that would happen at the U.S. Embassy unless the FSB approved and sanctioned it, or more likely organized it. So it was a very difficult environment to operate in. And I never felt unsafe physically, but I was always on my guard that they were looking to, for me personally and our mission, to embarrass, compromise, humiliate us if I misspoke. Even when I didn't misspeak, they would seize on, they're very protective of their legacy in what they call the Great Patriotic War, World War II. And I was giving remarks on Holocaust Remembrance Day at the Holocaust Museum and Memorial in Moscow. And it happened to be the anniversary in which a U.S. Army unit or U.S. military liberated a concentration camp. And the press coverage of my remarks that followed said, Ambassador Sullivan ignores the fact that it was the Red Army that liberated more concentration camps than the American or military or the UK military. And that wasn't the point. It was a historical footnote as the U.S. ambassador. They also, this is an example of trying to embarrass me. I'm walking out of the memorial, a very somber service, and state media comes up to me and sticks a microphone in my face and starts asking me questions about the KHL and Russian hockey. And because I'd gotten friendly with Slava Fetisov, a famous Soviet and Russian hockey player, played in the NHL, and I'd gone to a hockey game, a KHL game with Slava. And I'm outside the museum. I don't want to be rude to state media. So I said something about, well, this is a somber service, blah, blah, blah. But, in answer to your question about an NHL team playing in Moscow against a KHL team, the coverage that night was, imagine this clod who comes to this somber ceremony and starts talking about ice hockey. That's what they weren't looking to shoot me or poison me, but they did want to embarrass me. So I had to really be on my toes. Final point, I apologize. Jim has heard me say this. I've kissed the Blarney Stone twice, so I apologize for speaking too much. But that was a feature of the position that attracted me. It wasn't something that dissuaded me. I had the opportunity to serve in Tokyo as ambassador to Japan, which would have been a much different position, probably more rewarding professionally or financially for me after my service. But it was that hostile relationship with the Russians and their hostile treatment of Americans, both at the mission and Americans who were wrongfully detained, that made the position attractive to me.
Vicki, how well prepared were you by the State Department about the Russian-Ukraine situation before you came in? Can you talk a little bit about the démarche that you presented to the Austrian government?
I think I was pretty well prepared by the State Department, actually. I mean, we had in the lead-in to going, maps, conversations, and both in every kind of setting, as much as they could. No, I thought I was very well prepared. And then as things started to unfold after I got there, remember, here I am, first-time non-career ambassador with a terrific staff and a wonderful deputy, and my deputy was just amazing, and that was fantastic, and a mostly fantastic overall team. We're getting messages that we have to go and talk to the Austrians about. And if you remember, we publicly disclosed that Russia was going to conduct a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We called the play in advance. We said that they were going to go and march toward Kyiv. So before that was publicly announced, we all, of course, our job was to go and talk to our counterparts in the government and let them know. So it's a very somber and momentous thing to do. No one wanted to believe it. And I think and they would publicly say that and have since then. They didn't believe it. They said, we have to talk to our own people. If this is true, the world order will be flipped on its head. This is Kyiv. They're going to go to Kyiv. They could believe Crimea. They could believe, more into the Donbass. They could believe different things, but Kyiv, no, that can't be possible. So there was a lot of disbelief, I guess you would say, but then a dawning that we really were in a new world order, and what did all this mean?
So, Claire, how about you and Ireland at that time? Ireland, again, is a non-NATO but an EU country, prides itself on its neutrality. Talk about your interactions with the Irish government in the run-up to the war.
And that happened right away, because I arrived in Ireland the first week in February, and it was 2 weeks later that Russia did invade Ukraine. But as Vicki had alluded to, we knew this was happening. We were, so right off the bat, it was getting thrown into the deep end, diplomacy, immediately. So the same held true throughout Europe. We were hammering away the fact that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and none of the countries were really believing it at all. Certainly in Ireland, they are a neutral country, not by their constitution, but by policy. As the time went on, they shifted in their narrative of describing their neutrality, though, because it would be, we are militarily neutral, but not politically neutral. Early on, within the first couple of weeks of the invasion of Ukraine, an Irish citizen, Pierre Zagruski, who was a Fox photographer who was in Kyiv, he was killed. So that hit a little close to home. I remember his family had invited me to the funeral. Of course, all the members of the Irish government were there. And I can't say more loudly, when we're in the United States, this seems far away. When you're in Europe, it seems like next door. And there were already very many Ukrainians who lived in Ireland already. But after the invasion, Ireland, really took a strong stand in supporting Ukraine and continues to do so. Within a couple of months, there were over 100,000 Ukrainians who made their way to Ireland, and Ireland accepted them very readily. So it was a very proud moment for the Irish government, and they continue to. I mean, as of this week, Micheál Martin, who is the Taoiseach, which is Prime Minister, was on the phone with Zelensky reiterating Ireland's really strong support for Ukraine. So they continue to do that.
And John, how did your job evolve? You're there, you're being followed, all of that. Now, all of a sudden, you're starting to see the intelligence reports. Talk about the run-up to the war and your job at that point, right before midnight in Moscow, again, promoting your book on February 24th.
I think
I can hold it
your
up again.
percentage is getting bigger, Bob.
Yeah. We're going to negotiate afterwards.
So I date it to, I was with President Biden when he met with Putin in June, I think it was June 16th of 2021. And what did Biden and Putin talk about? Lots of things. Cyber attacks, election interference, wrongfully detained Americans, Navalny, arms control, Afghanistan, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is in June of 2021. Barely mentioned Ukraine. Neither Putin nor Biden barely mentioned Ukraine. I think President Biden, they did back-to-back, unlike the press statements that Trump and Putin did in Anchorage a few weeks ago. Biden and Putin did back-to-back, not simultaneous, press conferences. And it was significant because President Biden, who spoke second, I think he listed 11 or 12 things that he and Putin talked about. And either the 11th or 12th on the list was Ukraine. And it was just the formula of comply with the Minsk agreements, blah, blah, blah. Putin, at his press conference, although he doesn't discuss, he has the opportunity, but doesn't discuss Ukraine with Biden, he starts the press conference by saying, I don't have an opening statement. Let's go immediately to press questions. First question is Russian state media. Russian state, which means Putin is asking himself a question. Russian state media says, Mr. President, Ukraine is obviously the most important issue for Russia and all Russians. What did you discuss about Ukraine with Biden? And Putin accurately said, well, Biden said he wants the Ukrainians to comply with the Minsk agreements. Not quite accurate. Biden said he wants all parties to the Minsk agreements to comply with them. But you're right, it's extremely important, but we didn't really discuss it. Fast forward to October, and we're getting intelligence indications. By the way, out of that summit, we had all these work streams on cyber issues, climate change, preparing for COP26, arms control, strategic stability talks, all going on, and they screeched to a halt at the end of October when the intelligence community, the consensus is Putin is going to invade Ukraine, and it's going to be a large scale. The volume, the number of troops that it's going to be involved is going to be a full-scale invasion to take the country down. From that moment, I happened to be in Washington was with Secretary Blinken when he was briefed by the IC on this. I then traveled with Bill Burns, the CIA director, on November 1st, actually October 31st, for Burns, and was with Burns when he met with Putin and others. From that moment, there was nothing else discussed in the U.S.-Russia relationship other than Ukraine. We knew what the Russians were going to do. They were, to borrow President Trump's expression, tapping us along then. I would engage, and my Russian interlocutor, whoever it was, whether it was at the Kremlin, the foreign ministry, would read from talking points. I'd try to engage, as I am now, without notes, ask questions, and they would just go back to their talking points, find the most relevant one, and reread it. Now, it was message discipline, right? And it was also a bit of, and particularly at the foreign ministry, when I would meet at the foreign ministry, I would meet with a deputy foreign minister, and he would be accompanied by a retinue of foreign ministry officials. But among those officials were security service officers who were monitoring exactly what was said between us. So they lied their way through February 24th of 2022, absolutely not going to invade, no plans to do so. We knew the contrary, and no one in the U.S. government was surprised on February 24th when, the troops, the tanks, the planes, the helicopters, the missiles, the drones crossed the Russian border and the Belarusian border and attacked Ukraine.
So, Vicki, one of the jobs of an ambassador is to advocate for the interests of the United States, the principal job, obviously, for an ambassador. Advocating for the U.S. interests in the Russian-Ukraine situation is difficult in Austria because of the complicated relationship that the Austrians and the Russians have. Can you talk about that relationship? And I'm interested in how have the Russians insinuated themselves into Austria since the neutrality agreement in 1955, and how does that bode for the future?
First, there has long been, predating, let's just go before the Ukraine war, there's been warm relationships between Russia, former Soviet Union, then becoming Russia, and Austria. There were business links. There was a dependency on energy from Russia into Vienna, a landlocked country dependent on gas that was piped in that helped supply basically everything that they needed. Putin would go frequently to Vienna. There are a lot of Russians who were living throughout Austria. There were Lavrov, the foreign minister, was there all the time. There was a lot of attention paid to keeping Austria very much in the umbrella and warmth of the glow of this connection. Business trips, the Chamber of Commerce would send business delegations to Russia. There was a lot of this kind of thing going back and forth. So, and to be honest, in a country our size, treaty required them not to house foreign troops on their soil and not to join an alliance, but it didn't say they had to be equidistant. Russia interpreted it to mean that they had to be equidistant, that they couldn't take a position. Of course, equidistance in the Russia invasion of Ukraine is basically supporting Russia. And Austria did not do that. So our job was to constantly be sure that in the context of European sanctions, again, going back to that, making sure that Europe was going to stay together, that Austria was going to continue to be supporting. There were issues with gas and how to wean from Russian gas. The Gulf Stream 2 pipeline, the government had invested in it. The largest gas distribution company had invested in it. It was very, very significant. What was going to happen with that? Large banking interests were in Russia. from Austrian banking interests were in Russia. Very large. How does that work? How can we work with them? So we just kept dialogue going. I had frequent meetings with the CEOs of the bank and the gas company, but not just the government. So the diplomatic connections were also talking to them, keeping the conversation going, make sure that that we had an open dialogue. I mean, it was the purest kind of, I think, diplomacy in a way that you can do, because it was respectful, tough when you needed to be, but basically giving them the freedom and mobility from the United States to keep dialogue, keep it open, and see where you went. By the December of 24, the largest gas company there announced that it was completely off of using all Russian oil. And it did that on its own, even though gas was itself not sanctioned, only oil had been. And the bank, which the large bank there that was in Russia, that was trying to get out, I think probably waited too long, but didn't violate sanctions, worked with the United States, made sure that they were, we set up meetings at the Treasury and to make sure that they were at least doing things according to Hoyle as much as could happen. But basically, I think there a lot of the, they called it the Putin tax. Things just got taken, assets got taken, assets got confiscated. So it was also keeping conversation with the government during those times, because you don't want to see a collapse of the economy in your host country while you're also trying to navigate all those things.
Yeah, mention one thing that you had mentioned to me, and that's the former foreign minister.
Oh, yeah, well, it's quite, and I'll mention one other thing. Sorry, okay. The foreign minister, before I got there, foreign minister invited Putin to her wedding. This predates the Ukraine situation. She danced with Putin, curtsied to him. He gave her very expensive earrings. She's now living in St. Petersburg. She's totally defected to St. Petersburg. Another person in their security services, and there just was an indictment in the last week or so for this, but this scandal popped up in the last, couple of years publicly, last maybe 18 months publicly, but the indictment happened in the last week or so. They had to disband their security services because of Russian infiltration. They were Austrians who had been hired, doing the bidding of, I don't know what you call it, Russia, according to the indictment. So I guess I'm supposed to say allegedly, right? And they were stealing information to pass on. So they disbanded those security services and have had to start those from scratch. I mean, those are just two examples of how deeply entrenched and what a big problem it is.
Yeah. Jim informs me that a lot of people have questions, but before we go to questions, John, I want to ask you, probably Vladimir Putin better than anybody, certainly in this room. Talk to us a little bit about Vladimir Putin and also what his view of the war is.
Oh boy, that's a big question. I'll keep this short. I failed in diplomacy in one major respect. I didn't get Bob Kraft's Super Bowl ring back for him. But it's interesting in thinking about that. This is an American, a very sophisticated American businessman, owns an NFL team. You present something to Vladimir Putin, probably the person who controls he's really the richest person in the world. He controls more wealth than anybody else. Sorry, Elon Musk. You show him a piece of jewelry like that, he assumes you're just giving it to him. This wasn't some calculated, I'm going to clip this from Bob Kraft. That's just the way the world in which he operates. He is, at his core, what they call a Chekist, which is derived from the original secret police established by Lenin and Felix Dzerzhinsky in December 1917 during the revolution. The secret police responsible for the Red Terror. Putin is steeped in that world. He is a Chekist. The Russians celebrate Cheka Day in early December to commemorate the establishment of the first secret police organization of what became the Soviet Union. Putin describes himself as a KGB man and continues, and this is in recent years, continues to say, like organized crime everywhere, I guess, he's a KGB man and there's no such thing as a former KGB man. And you don't understand the notion that Vladimir Putin said a prayer for Donald Trump when he was shot in Pennsylvania, and repeating that without a smirk as farcical, but actually accepting it is hard to understand. That indicates someone who doesn't understand who Vladimir Putin is.
And you've said that the war will never end until we, the United States, understand that Vladimir Putin is at war with us and not Ukraine. Talk about that.
His word, not mine. The United States and our vassals, which means our NATO allies, are the enemy. Not adversary, not competitor, enemy. That's his view, and he really means it. When he says the great geopolitical catastrophe for the 20th century was the demise of the Soviet Union, he really means it. And people in the West don't understand. And what he was saying was, it wasn't the demise of Soviet communism. He's not a communist. It's hard to be the richest person in the world with $1 billion palace in Sochi and be a communist. But, I guess the Soviet legacy indicates that maybe it's easier to reconcile over there. But no, he says, he has said in the past, if you're not nostalgic for how we lived in Soviet days, you don't have a heart. But if you want to return to the communist system, you don't have a brain. So what he laments is the demise of the Soviet Empire, which succeeded the Russian Empire. The Tsars were emperors. That's what he's looking to recreate, control from Moscow.
We have a few minutes. If you have a question, Paul Matera.
Thank you, Jim. So apropos of those last comments, I had an opportunity last year to attend a series of lectures by Sir Tony Brenton of British Foreign Service. He was himself former...
Let me hand you the mic.
Yes, thank you. So I was just saying, I had an opportunity to participate in a series of lectures by Sir Tony Brenton of the British Foreign Service, and himself a former ambassador to Russia. And he was asked a question about the three world powers, United States, China, and Russia. And he brushed aside Russia. He said, no, Russia doesn't belong in that trilogy of the world's great powers. And I'd be interested in your and the other ambassadors, your reaction to that. Where does, we spend so much time and give Russia so much attention, but where does it really fit in the constellation of sort of world order?
We have allowed Putin to claw back into that circle of global superpowers. I think President Obama was probably spot on when he described Russia as a regional power. Senator McCain more colorfully describing it as, a big gas station with nuclear weapons. The Russian Federation is not the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had 15 republics, 350 million people. The Red Army was a colossus that would have overwhelmed Western militaries if they had decided to invade Western Europe. That is not the Russian Federation today. That's what Putin laments. He wants that, and he's getting it because he's going on the world stage in Tianjin this week with Xi, and the Russian media is covering it as the restoration of Russia to superpower status. We in the West are effectively allowing Putin to do that. The Russians have, in many ways, co-opted us. The foreign minister, as Vicky said, the former Austrian foreign minister, now on the board of Rosneft. Senior former Gerhard Schroeder, former chancellor of Germany, on the board of Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline. Putin has utter contempt for us. He thinks we're greedy bastards. He can buy us off, and we don't have principles, and we don't stand behind our principles. So we have allowed him back into the game. Now, he's got two great, as Senator McCain said, he's got energy, which he can use as a weapon, and he can threaten us with nuclear annihilation. So it makes it a powerful state, but it's not the Soviet Union.
Other questions for the panelists? Carl Gustin?
Yes, Ambassador Sullivan, how badly do you think this administration and this president are being played by Putin, and whether she and others are part of that game that's being played?
Yeah, I'm afraid that the president, I mean, he knows it himself deep down. I mean, he said this months ago. I don't want to be tapped along by Vladimir Putin. That's exactly what's happening. Trump is threatening to impose tariffs, setting deadlines, 50 days, 10 days. Says on Air Force One flying to Anchorage, this is the President of the United States talking to the media, to the world, the most important thing for me coming out of this meeting is I must have a ceasefire agreement from Putin. He gets to Anchorage, we need a longer-term solution, not just a ceasefire. Of course he's being tapped along. It's absurd to contend otherwise.
Yes. Good.
I have a loud voice, so Mary from World Boston. The U.S. has traditionally played very effectively in the arena of soft power, to use the phrase of the very great late Joe Nye. During your terms, how did you see the relative advantage or disadvantage of the U.S. in terms of soft power fluctuate? And how is soft power deployed across alliances today? Big question for any of you.
Can I just say, soft power is enormously important. Diplomacy is enormously important. But if we think it's important, you have to fund it. You have to put your money where your mouth is. Right now, we are gutting. We have been for years. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that just started with this administration. We do not give the same support to diplomacy that we do to war. We do not look at prevention. If you look at how embassies need to develop personal relationships, you need to be able to, we talk about entertaining. Yes, you do need to have that little glass. You need to be able to break bread with people. You need to be able to develop a relationship so that you can develop trust, and you need to be able to tell the American story. You do that in various ways, but those things cost a little bit of money. And we have an incredible number of tremendous professionals who just always get by with less and less and less and less resources. I think we need to decide that it's a priority, but because it's far away, somebody hasn't made the case for why it's the priority that it really needs to be. But the money is going to go one place or the other. It's going to go into waging war, or it's going to go, or you're going to, which you need to have. I mean, you obviously need to have that, but you also need to have it in terms of preventing, and in terms of keeping your friends and allies. One of the other great things that we've done as a country, and I was reminded of it just recently. I resaw the John Adams show on HBO, which is sort of just with Paul Giamatti and Laura Linney, and it's worth. But you go back just the founding of our country. We were founded on alliances. We wouldn't have a country if we didn't have that alliance with France at the very beginning. investing in our alliances, using our alliances to our own advantage for our own benefit is so important. But that requires a mindset and it requires an investment, and I just think that we're missing that.
John Quincy Adams, first minister to the Russian Empire, his statue's outside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow.
I was just going to say also, I think we have seen our soft power diminish over the last several months. And, you know, I think President Biden, when he became president, worked very hard to reestablish all of our connections. The strength of our strength is our unity. NATO is strong. And I think what we are seeing now is we have enough people in the world that don't like us. But we don't need to take shots at our friends and allies. And I believe that that is weakening us very strongly.
Peter Rice?
Thank you, Jim. My question is to the panel. Obviously, with the more isolationist policy in place, with your experiences, how can we tell everyday Americans just how much these insidious regimes are impacting their life in cybercrime and security, particularly around bank fraud? And how involved, John, maybe to you, is the Russian government in that fraud and how much they support, including North Korea? And then Claire tying in the killings of the Iranian regime and assassinating dissidents. I think a lot of Americans aren't aware of these things, of how much it impacts our daily life. It's not just abroad and far away. It's on your cell phones right now with texts.
Everyone looking at me. Okay. Well, you know, what you said about, I mean, the case is made with respect to the People's Republic of China that, you know, we the West brought the PRC into the international or the global trading system, the WTO, you name it. It was created after the Second World War, and we introduced a country led by the Chinese Communist Party that isn't committed to the values and the principles that animated the creation of this system. So whether it's commercial espionage, you name it, it's been a shock to Americans to realize the extent to which the PRC is undermining the system which they have milked to a good thing, cause the rise of hundreds of millions of Chinese nationals out of crushing poverty. But what I'd say about Russia is I used to talk, when I was Deputy Secretary of Commerce, I traveled many times to China, including with Secretary Paulson when he was Secretary of the Treasury, and very bullish on developing the commercial relationship between the United States and the PRC. We have some familiarity with the attraction of U.S. businesses, U.S. corporations to China. It's almost like moths drawn to a flame. Russia's different. Russia is not an economic superpower like the PRC. It doesn't have that same sort of economic influence outside of its energy sales. But the difference between, the way I would sum it up is the difference between the PRC and Russia, and Jim will appreciate this, it's sort of a Dorchester perspective on this. You do business in the PRC, you're likely to get arrested and lose your shirt. They'll take advantage of you. You do business in Russia, you'll wind up with 2 bullets in the back of your head, in the trunk of a car. That's the difference between Russia and the PRC. I can't tell you how many American executives we at the embassy had to get out of Russia, just in my 3 years as ambassador, because we knew through our sources that they were going to be arrested. Not because they had committed a crime, but because they were succeeding in a commercial deal, getting an advantage over a Russian counterparty. And that Russian counterparty has a cousin who's in the FSB or has an uncle who's a deputy prime minister. And these people, we literally had to say, here's your ticket, go to the airport, we'll go to your hotel, we'll get your luggage, and we'll send it to you. Leave now. I don't want to be visiting you at a labor camp in Mordovia. That's the reality of the Russian Federation today. For Americans, wrongfully detained Americans, which we haven't talked about, That really got my Irish up. I mean, these were people who were completely innocent. Many of them, former military background, they would target former military, people who had had security clearances, or people who would be popular and sympathetic figures in the United States. Brittany Griner, Evan Gershkovich for the Wall Street Journal. Their pawns, it doesn't matter to their gut. There is no rule of law. There is no independent judiciary. Same is true in the PRC. So these are countries that it's difficult often for people in the West to understand the governments that we're dealing with, particularly in Moscow. And not understanding them makes it possible for them to continue to exploit us, our government, and Americans generally, to our detriment.
John, you ought to write a book. Ed Davis.
Good morning. Thank you all for this fascinating panel. Back around,
Ed is the former police commissioner here in Boston.
thank you. Back in around 2010, I had the honor of sitting down at a tea with Mary Churchill. And during our conversation, she discussed with me her dad's frustration with the American public and FDR with their isolationist policies prior to Pearl Harbor. The question that I have is, are we in a similar situation now? And do you see that? And if so, what can be done about it with the American public and the political structure here in the United States? For anybody.
Well, I'll just note that in my conversations with people with foreign secretaries of the United Kingdom, the foreign ministry, and so forth, and trying to explain positions that the United States was taking, whether it was on the JCPOA, the so-called Iran deal, or any number of other issues. And I would sense frustration on my counterparts' demeanor, and I would often have to resort to, and I would paraphrase Churchill, I said, "Don't sweat it. We'll come out in the right place." And I would quote Churchill and say, "The Americans can be counted on to do the right thing after exhausting every other possible alternative." That sustains me to this day. And what Vicki said and Claire said both about our soft power and our diplomacy or lack of diplomacy and cutting resources, absolutely right. But there's a bigger issue here, which is the United States, as Reagan said, a shining city on a hill. People particularly in the West, but around the world, used to look to the United States as this land of freedom and opportunity. And the biggest problem I see for our soft power is our own divisions and the injuries we inflict on ourselves where we're attacking universities, or the behavior of the universities themselves, attacking our judiciary, or decisions that some of the judges and justices are making. But we're back to court packing now. What does that say about the rule? The rule of law in this country was one of our fundamental tenets that made us an attractive market, made us an attractive place to live. The executive branch just can't decide you're a criminal, you're going away. There's an independent judiciary that exercises that check. That doesn't exist in the PRC or in the Russian Federation. So I'll quote Kennan. Kennan said, this is in his... he wrote two pieces right after the Second World War about the Soviet Union. He didn't really distinguish between Russia and the Soviet Union, Russians and Soviets. He was talking really about Russia. And he said, whether we prevail in this competition that we have, his word, competition we have with Russia, with the Soviet Union, Soviet communism, it really doesn't matter what the Soviets do. It's about what we do. If we stay united, true to our values, true to our founding principles, there is no way, it may take time, it may take decades, it ultimately did, but there's no way that the Soviet Union, the Soviet communism, is going to prevail over the government that was originally created by those people that Vicky mentioned in the late 18th century. Say what you want about them, but that system of government has stood us pretty darn well over centuries. And to the extent that we're now attacking and undermining it, both sides don't trust each other. It's our own internal weakness that is going to lead the PRC, the Russian Federation, this new world order. We got to get our own house together, in addition to spreading the word through public diplomacy channels.
Can I just say something that's, going back to the isolationists, we've had isolationist strains from the founding of our country. I mean, this has gone on, and I agree, and I have basic optimism that ultimately we will all end up doing the right thing. But what's happening is, in terms of these internal divisions, who's fomenting our internal divisions? How do we get information? Who is seeding the fomentation, if you will? And we have willing participants who are gathering, but what kinds of vehicles do people have for getting information? In Europe, we knew during this, right after Russia invaded Ukraine, that disinformation had exponentially increased. Just channels of disinformation. But then you didn't need to have external sources of disinformation coming in, because it became homegrown. Because those same narratives started getting repeated in social media and other venues and even in mainstream media, and so that it became common knowledge, even though it was based on false premises. I fear that the same sorts of things are happening here, that information crosses a certain barrier, and then we're just getting ourselves into a constant state of frenzy. And so we're not able to be calm. Our level of division is a constant topic of conversation, certainly in Europe. I hear it every time I would speak, people would ask me a question about it, about the people follow we don't understand how much everything we do is followed. Every court decision is followed. Every election is followed. It's unbelievable. When people come up and talk to you about the midterms, you're like, what the midterms are? What happens here impacts the world. And one way that we talk, going back to the soft power conversation, is we need to have cross-fertilization. We need to have people going to other countries, living there, experiencing, knowing what's happening there, and we need to have other people coming here, living, experiencing. That's how we understand each other. But with this kind of division, I actually had a former very high-ranking Austrian official whose son is coming here to study call me just recently to ask me if I thought his son was going to be shot. And did I think we were going to be in civil war in the United States? Because his son was worried that the United States was going to have another civil war. This is how impactful the level of discourse that we have here is on the rest of the world.
I just want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank Bob for moderating the discussion. The ambassadors will stay. If people would like a photo with the three ambassadors, come down front. But it's been a very informative, enlightening discussion, and I thank all of you for coming here today, and thank the ambassadors.